Hello, 6th graders. We are starting Unit 9, which is on applying percents. Our first lesson is on percent and estimation. Our learning target for today is I can estimate percents using fractions and decimals. All right, so we are looking at this graph here about guitar, about learning to play, I guess it's just learning to play an instrument and the different types of ways that you could learn. So private lessons, taught by yourself, taught by a friend. The blue is men and the purple is women. Our first question here is what fraction of women took lessons at school? And if we go to lessons at school and women is in purple, that's right here at 30%. Now we know that percents are always out of 100. So that would be 30 over 100. If we were to simplify that, that would simplify to 3/10. So that's what fraction, oops, not 3/100, 3/10. That's what fraction of women took lessons at school in order to learn an instrument. And then it's asking us if 200 women were surveyed, how many of them took lessons at school? Well, we're going to take this 3/10 and we're going to multiply it by the 200 women. Now I know multiplying fractions, I can put whole numbers over 1. Multiply numerators, so 3 times 200 is 600. 10 times 1 is 10. Zeros cancel here, and we are left with 60. So that would mean 60 women would have taken lessons at school in order to learn an instrument. Now on question 2 here, it's asking us to estimate the number of men who took lessons at school. So what we're going to do is look at this 26% and find nicer numbers to work with. When we are estimating percents, we always want to look for the tens. Otherwise, 25 and 75 are good amounts. So looking at 10, trying to round to 10, 20, 30, 40, so on and so forth. Otherwise, 25% and 75% are also good amounts that we could estimate too. So based on that information, if we have 26%, 26% is approximately, I'm going to round that down to 25%. Because then what I can do, 25 out of 100 simplifies to 1/4. And then I can take that 1/4 and I'm trying to find 1/4 of 200. And anytime we see that of, it's going to tell us that we're going to multiply. So we're going to take 1/4 times 200. So put 200 over 1, multiply tops, multiply bottoms. 200 divided by 4 would be 50. So then that means that 50 men learned at school, took lessons at school. So we're estimating, I should say it's approximately. So we use the squiggly lines to show that it's an estimate. So approximately 50 men were taught at school out of the 200 men that were surveyed on this information. Okay, the first problem up here, box turtles have been known to live for 120 years. American alligators have been known to live 40% as long as box turtles. About how long can an American alligator live? That word about tells me that we're going to be estimating. So we just want to make nicer numbers. 120 is already a good number. We don't really need to estimate that at all. So I'm going to estimate the 42%. I'm going to round that down to 40%. Again, we want the nice tens, 20, 30, or 25 or 75. Percents are always out of 100, so I'm going to take these as fractions, and I'm going to multiply them that way. Well, I know that that would simplify to 4 over 10, which is 2 over 5. So now I'm trying to find 2/5 of 120, and we're going to do that by multiplying. So then that would multiply it to 240 over 5. Then if I were to divide, I'm trying to see how many times can 240 be divided by 5. And I would figure out that that is 48. So about how long can an American alligator live? Well, they can live, it seems to be about 48 years. Just an estimate. So that's one method. Make the percent into a fraction and then multiply. Another method for estimating the percent of a number is to first find out what 10% of the number would be, and then to multiply. For example, 70%, we could break that up into 7 and 10%. So then the 70% of a number would be 7 times the 10%. So first we find 10% of the number, and then from there we multiply that by whatever number is in front of our percent here. So 70% we would multiply by 7. If it was 20% after we find the 10%, we would multiply by 2. If it was 80%, we would multiply by 8. And it's really easy to find 10% of anything because you just move the number over. So if I was trying to find 10% of 90, all I do is I move the decimal over one spot, and that's 9. If I was trying to find 10% of 400, move the decimal over one spot, so that would be 40. 10% of 7, move the decimal over, so that would be 7/10. And then whatever you have there, after you have the 10%, you would then multiply by, if you were trying to figure out 60% for all of these, you would then multiply these by 6 to get up to the 60%. Because we found for 10%, so to get from 10% to 60%, we would need to multiply by 6. Okay? So we're going to look at this problem here. We're going to use that method with this question about tipping. This is so common when you are looking at tipping at a restaurant, is to estimate. The kind of standard amount of tip is 20%, and instead of pulling out your calculator and figuring out 20% of it, a lot of people would estimate. So they would round this to a nicer number. Instead of $14.72, I would say that that's $15. And to find 10% of 15, I would move one spot over, which would be 1.5. And then to figure out 20%, since we want twice that amount, right? We found just for 10%, we want to get up to 20, so we're going to multiply that by 2. 1.5 times 2 is 3, so you would leave about $3 to your waitress. Okay, so we have another one here. I'm going to use both methods and show how they work using the fraction method and then the 10%. And you just have to decide which one works better for you. Dante plans to put 80% of his paycheck into his savings account. His paycheck this week was $295. About how much money will he put into his savings account? So I'm going to round 295. I'm going to estimate that to be 300. So 80% over 100 would simplify. Again, it's easiest to multiply in simplest form, so that's why we're simplifying these. 8 over 10. If I divide both by 2, I would get 4/5. So then I would take 4/5, and I would multiply that by 300 over 1. 4 times 300 would be 1,200. 5 times 1 is 5. If we do our division here to figure out how many times 5 goes into 1,200, we find our answer is 240. So he would put approximately $240 into his savings account. The other method is to first find 10% of 300, and we do that by moving the decimal over one spot, so that would be 30. Since we want 8 or 80%, which is 8 times, so we're multiplying by 8, so you're going to take the $30 times 8. Well, I know 3 times 8 is 24, add a 0, approximately $240. So either method works. The 10%, move the decimal and multiply. The other one, put it in a fraction, multiply. All right, now we're looking at estimating when the percents are more than 100 or less than 1. Just something to note over here, when estimating the percent of a number and the percent is greater than 100, the estimate should always be larger than the actual number that you're starting with. So think about extra credit. If you get over 100%, like if the test was out of 20 points and you got over 100%, that means you got more than the 20 points that were possible through extra credit. So it should be more. Okay. So we're going to look at this first one here. Estimate 122% of 50. I'm going to round that to approximately 120%. You could also round up to 125, but 120% of 50. What I'm going to do is I'm going to split that. I'm going to first find 100% of 50, and then I'm going to do 20% of 50. Once I have those two answers together, I'm going to add them. So 100% of 50. If the test was 50 questions and you got 100%, you got all 50 points. Now 20%, I'm going to use the method to find 10%. So I'm going to move the decimal over 1, which is 5. But since we want 20, I'm going to multiply, and 5 times 2 is 10. So 50 plus 10 is 60. So this should be approximately 60, which it makes sense that it's more than what we started with. So find the two parts, add. Next one, if it's less than 1, well, I'm going to start with finding out what 1% is. So 1%, I'm going to round this just to make it easy all the way up to 600. So 1% of 600. Now when we found 10%, we moved the decimal 1 spot. When you're finding 1%, it's actually moving the decimal 2 spots over. So 1% of 600 equals 6, but we only want a fourth of that. We don't want the full 1%. So now I'm going to find 1/4 of 6 by multiplying. So that would be 6 over 1. 1 times 6 is 6, 4 times 1. Simplify, or turn that to a mixed number. 1 and 2/4, so 1.5. So 1/4%, that's a very small percent, of 589 is approximately 1.5. Okay, so first find 1% and then find 1/4 of it. Okay, so try these 3 on your own and then come back and check. 174% of 200. I would estimate that to be 175. So you need to find 100% of 200. And we need to find 75% of 200. So 100% of 200, the full amount is 200. I'm going to turn 75% into a fraction, and I know that would be 75 over 100. Simplifies to 3/4 times 200 over 1. So that would be 600 over 4. And if we were to divide this, (600) divided by 4 is 150. So now we add those two parts together. So 200 plus 150 would be 350. So this would be approximately 350. Again, it makes sense because it should be more than what we're starting with. Next one, 298% of 45. I'm going to estimate that to be approximately 300. And I'm just going to keep 45 as it is. So we're trying to find 300% of 45. So I'm going to start with 100%. Well, 100% of 45 is 45, the full amount. But we want 300%. So to get from 100 to 300, we multiply by 3. So 45 times 3. And 45 times 3 is 135. So this would be approximately 135. Next one, we're looking at 0.25% of 789. I'm going to estimate this up to 800. Just like we did on that other one, I'm going to start with finding 1% of 800. And I do that by moving the decimal 2 spots to the left, so that would be 8. But we only want 1/4 of that, so now I'm going to find 1/4 of 8 by multiplying, which would be 8 over 4, which is equal to 2. So that answer, it would be approximately 2 for your estimate. Last year, 639 students attended a summer camp. Of those who attended this year, 0.9% also attended last year. How many people attended the camp 2 years in a row. So it's only 0.9% that attended both years. So we're going to take 639. I'm going to estimate that to be 640. And I'm going to estimate the 0.9% to be 1%. So we're trying to find 1% of 640. Again, anytime you're trying to find 1%, move the decimal 2 spots to the left. So that would be about 6.4. So I would round that to about 6 people. You can't cut somebody into 4/10. Since it's asking about round about an estimate, we would just round it to the whole number, 6 people. Okay, that's all that we have for this video. If you are stuck or confused, go back, rewatch it, and then you can also practice on IXL.